Welcome back to The Left Field, the podcast where four friends discuss their fantasy Congress League and what the Democrats are up to from a leftist perspective. We're your hosts. I'm Alexi Jenkins.
I'm Luis Pagan.
I'm Chandan.
And I'm Himanshu Pandit.
All right. Representative Yay or Nay, our segment where we take an individual that we're interested in covering and go through their background, how they stand on progressive issues, scandals, recent and prominent legislation, and then at the end, we'll vote yay or nay and see whether or not our podcast approves or generally unapproves. So the first one up is going to be Peter DeFazio. He is Oregon's 4th District House member. He was born in 1947 in a suburb of Massachusetts. He credits his great uncle with shaping his politics, and that great uncle almost never said Republican without adding bastard.
Okay.
Coming of age for this guy. He received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Tufts University in 1969, a Master of Arts degree from the University of Oregon in 1977, and then for some reason decided to work as an aide to Oregon's 4th District House member at the time. He did so for 5 years, and then he replaced his old boss to become Oregon's House rep for the 4th District, 1986. He has been there ever since.
Longer than any of us have been alive.
So what has he done since then? So in 1992, he co-founded the Congressional Progressive Caucus with Bernie Sanders.
I'm in.
Oh.
Oregon. Let's do it.
During the 1999 World Trade Organization meetings in Seattle, DeFazio marched with protesters who opposed the WTO's new economic globalization policies. In 2008, he signed a letter to Nancy Pelosi asking for 0.25% tax on all financial trade transactions and also introduced the No Bailout Act in 2008.
Nice.
DeFazio declined to support the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. He was one of only 7 Democrat House members to vote against the bill. DeFazio said that his vote was due to his frustration over compromises to win support from moderate Republicans in the Senate. He began to advocate that the U.S. Senate do away with filibuster. In 2009, he also made headlines when he said in an interview with MSNBC that Obama should fire the current Secretary of Treasury, Timothy Geithner, and National Economic Director Lawrence Summers, saying we may have to sacrifice just 2 more jobs to get millions back for Americans. A year later, he called for the impeachment of John Roberts because of the Supreme Court ruling on Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission.
That is incredible.
In 2011, DeFazio said that Obama lacked the fight to follow through on ending the Bush-era tax cuts.
Ooh.
DeFazio and Bernie Sanders said that it would be good for the Democratic Party if Obama faced a meaningful primary. DeFazio was one of 19 members of Congress to urge John Kerry to prioritize the human rights of Palestinian children living under the occupied West Bank, and in the letter called Israel's treatment of Palestinian children cruel, inhumane, degrading, and an anomaly in the world.
What year was that?
2015.
Hell yeah.
Wow.
DeFazio has shown a propensity to vote against legislation that would increase U.S. military power, has consistently voted against the Patriot Act, including its inception after 9/11, arguing that it infringes on American civil rights. DeFazio has been in the same seat since 1986, and apart from his first election, he has not faced another contest nearly that close until 2010, winning every election before then with at least 61% of the vote. A list of the caucuses that DeFazio is on. He is part of the Animal Protection Caucus, the Bike Caucus, Community Healthcare Caucus, Congressional Arts Caucus, I guess that's what his arts degree is. Healthy Forest Caucus. My favorite one is the House Small Brewers Caucus, which he founded and co-chairs. The Human Rights Caucus, the Organic Caucus, the Populist Caucus, Pro-Choice Caucus, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Caucus, the Rural Caucus, Congressional International Conservation Caucus, and the Medicare for All Caucus. So he is the chair of the Transportation Subcommittee in the House. So a lot of his legislation is kind of like transportation related. So down to his policies. He's a co-sponsor of Medicare for All. He is a original co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. He supports reparations for Black and Indigenous communities. He has been involved in land back and is a huge supporter of Indigenous rights. On LGBTQ rights, he's rated 100% by HRC. He has no clear stance on defund the police, but it's very likely that he supports defund. He is rated plus 30 for indicating pro-drug reform stance, like the highest possible score. And he's also rated 0% by FAIR, indicating voting record of loosening immigration. And for scandals and gaffes, I couldn't really stick something on the guy. The district itself is actually purple. It's not even like very, very blue.
He's like the Moses is to Bernie's Jesus.
All of his stints is just so far back have just been great.
is really a perfect score. He's a yes on every single issue that we have prioritized, including native rights, which essentially no one is active on. What really impressed me about him, from what you were telling us, is his stance on globalization and America's corporate capitalism. That's something that basically all of our politicians to this day are extremely bought in on. I think the Endless Frontier Act, which we covered a couple episodes, if anybody wants to go back and listen, is a great example of America's stance as a neoliberal global capitalist country that's trying to essentially homogenize the world and homogenize the global economy, despite the fact that it's had extremely negative impacts on everyone in our country, but most saliently the working class. So the fact that he was advocating against that way back when is deeply impressive to me. So I'm definitely a yay. I don't even think I have to say it.
Definite yay there.
Yeah, I mean, this just shows that progressive policies are popular and progressives can unapologetically be progressives and pursue those policies and make these bold statements that we've seen him making since the 80s and be extremely popular.
How long has he been serving? 1986?
Dude, 1986. He was like an aide to the past representative for 5 years before he got the exact same district position.
I mean, that is some white male privilege just sliding into the rep position, like almost straight out of college.
I was actually concerned about that. So in between, he did serve 3 years as a county commissioner, which I did like that. It was better than him working there for 5 years and then just immediately replacing his boss.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that I did work outside of that seat and kind of for the state to some capacity. And also to a certain degree, I mean, it also shows you his depth of experience in that area. It's not the best, to be honest. The 3 years did make me feel a little bit better.
Yeah, and working for a county commissioner is not a glamorous set yourself up for federal politics post. So that is encouraging to me as well.
I'm very impressed with his profile.
We love him. So happy to yay. Enthusiastic yay. Enthusiastic consent to be governed.
Finally, right?
That's very rare. We've had some pretty like solid yays, and this one's like you didn't even have to like finish talking before we're like, yeah, definitely.
He's the first one that we've heard about that has actually beaten out Steve Cohen.
Yeah.
We have a new top contender in the house.
A new darling of the podcast.
All right, welcome back. Now it's time for the Bill Deep Dive, where we take a closer look at very active legislation in the Congress.
What very active legislation?
Elucidate us.
I want to talk about Senate Bill 1260, the United States Innovation and Competition Act of 2021, also known as the Endless Frontier Act. Specifically, I want to focus on the NASA amendment that was proposed by Maria Cantwell, Senator of Washington.
It's the Pacific Northwest.
Right.
And Roger Wicker, who is the Senator of Mississippi. It is a bipartisan amendment to the Endless Frontier Act, which was introduced in May of 2021. So the amendment that was proposed by Cantwell, the NASA amendment, calls for $10 billion in additional funding to NASA to carry out the Human Landing System program, which is part of the Artemis program, which is going to be a program to return to the moon and bring the first woman and I believe people of color to the moon. It's supposed to be an inclusive part of the space race.
Why doesn't the government just give us rights, though?
Okay, they don't do that, okay? They just give you a holiday and say, shut up.
Not like space colonization to me, but go ahead.
It provides this additional $10 billion in funding for NASA to carry out the Human Landing System program and also to maintain competitiveness within the program by funding, design, development, testing, and evaluation of not fewer than 2 entities. The bill would also require NASA to continue development of the Exploration Upper Stage, which is a new, more powerful second stage of the agency's Space Launch System rocket. And it says that this upper stage should be available for the 3rd launch of the rocket itself. A little bit of background. This came shortly after Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin filed a protest against NASA's decision to award SpaceX with a $2.9 billion award to develop the human lander system. Originally, Blue Origin bid for this at a price of $5.99 billion, which was compared to SpaceX's $2.9 billion. And this is based on NASA's evaluation of the proposal. In late April, Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin files this protest. By May 12th, Senator Cantwell, who represents the state where Blue Origin is based, puts forth this amendment. Shortly thereafter, good old Bernie Sanders comes forward and puts an amendment to, quote unquote, eliminate the multi-billion-dollar Bezos bailout, because this is an obvious ploy to try and support Blue Origin. Unfortunately, On June 8th, the Senate passed the bill with the amendment 68-32. It's in the House right now. This can easily interpret it as a way for Cantwell to support Jeff Bezos, who happens to reside in her state. The amendment itself is actually going to cause some issues for NASA. So by requiring that second entity to be evaluated, they might force NASA to reopen the competition that has already been closed out, and it's going to delay the moon mission that has a current target of 2024. The legislation is also ignoring NASA's original plan, which was to increase competition while keeping that 2024 landing date by allowing SpaceX to work on the human landing system while a second company is brought in to compete for subsequent landings. So NASA already had a plan to evaluate other entities in place. They just wanted to close out this important section of it targeting 2024. On top of that, the section that requires the exploration of the upper stage wasn't asked for by NASA. They specifically said that they didn't need that upper stage to complete its early Artemis moon missions. The first launches are going to use an already available upper stage, and that's powerful enough for a crew of astronauts on board. So the legislation is going to burden NASA with the upper stage development that'll cost them around $10 billion and take 5 years at a time when the agency is already delayed and trying to complete the first moon missions. You can see that this amendment is really just there to provide openings for Blue Origin to become a part of the Artemis mission by A, requiring NASA to evaluate competitors, which it was already going to do, and B, delay the launch so that these other entities have a way to join the competition to potentially get on board with the mission. Senate's already passed this. It's passed on to the House. I'm not sure exactly when they're going to be voting on it. If the House doesn't take it out, there is some potential for it being closed out. The Senate will have to appropriate the money for this, which they haven't done already. That was going to take place later on, so they can eventually refute it. But in its current stage, it looks like our Congress is more than happy to subsidize Jeff Bezos and give him an extra $10 billion for a project he already failed on.
So could it get removed in the House?
It's possible.
But then they have to reconcile the Senate and House versions before it goes to the White House if they make changes.
Yeah, I love the bipartisan support. Like just some random guy in Mississippi. I just can't even imagine the phone call between Jeff Bezos and random Republican in Mississippi being like, yo, like, I need you to support this like amendment. I'll give you, I have no idea, like whatever it might be, like whatever follows that sentence,
So there's another section to this that I didn't spend too much time going into, but essentially in Mississippi, there was some testing of a new sort of propelling system that NASA tested once, and they were like, okay, we don't need to do that again. But in this amendment, it includes the ability for NASA to continue testing there as long as they want in perpetuity. So not something that NASA wants. They already proved out the concept. They don't need this additional testing, but the amendment includes this section in there to sort of force them to continue to do testing in Mississippi, I guess for Republican brownie points.
This amendment just strikes me as staggeringly cruel. We're just coming out of a pandemic when millions of people lost their jobs, millions of people lost their health insurance, tens of millions of people, according to a report in the Washington Post that I just had in front of me, said that they couldn't put food on the table. And meanwhile, Jeff Bezos's fortune increased by $75.6 billion over the course of the pandemic, according to a report by the Brookings Institute. And Elon Musk's fortune increased in similar proportions. It just seems so heartless and insane that our government is subsidizing the companies of two of the richest men on the planet. At the same time, our government is telling us, we don't have money for your healthcare. We don't have money to raise the minimum wage. We don't have money to take care of you. We're going to cut unemployment benefit, and we don't care while all of you starve. At the same time, we're going to give $13 billion in handouts to two of the richest men on the planet.
Right. All Bezos has to do is throw a fit, and it looks like the Congress is falling over itself to say, wait, we should include Blue Origin in our NASA project. We don't want SpaceX to be the only company that wins out here.
It also highlights the staggering corruption of our system.
Yeah.
This is clearly pay to play, with Jeff Bezos being the richest man in the district, having two of the most productive companies, rich companies in Washington state. And Senator of Washington is going to enormous lengths to make sure that he's happy. And then the senator from Mississippi is getting a huge kickback from the project as well with that third section of the amendment that you were talking about. So it just shows you who these senators think that they're actually working for. And it is absolutely not us. It is not even the 1%, the fraction of the 1%.
Yeah, it's pretty absurd. Imagine you went to school and you had a degree, but you couldn't get a job. And then you're like, hey, Congressman, can you write a job specifically for me and make it like pass it through law? They're like, sure, why not? Here's a $10 billion job just for you. That's kind of how this feels, right? It's like if you didn't get the bid, you shouldn't rewrite the rules so that, hey, here's another 10 billion, right? That's just absurd.
Like he needs the money.
Like what this eventually turns into is a news story, right? It's like, oh, Blue Origin awarded $10 billion to pursue. And then now it's like the headline is, wow, there's competition for SpaceX. It validates the business proposition.
It's the most extreme vanity project that a human being has ever undertaken.
It's one thing to try to go to space while you try to improve the livelihoods of everyone. But it's another thing just to go to space, fuck everyone else. I'm trying to use my money solely for this. I'm sure like in his mind, he thinks that Amazon is providing like the greatest service in the world, but it's not like they're preventing poverty or making the livelihoods of their warehouse workers better or their drivers better, right? The human component is often lost. I would imagine that if capitalism also worked with the human component a lot more and understood that profits aren't everything, but long-term profits come from making sure your workers are taken care of, making sure everyone's taken care of, then we'd be in a much better place, in my opinion. But none of the people who are in these CEO roles can ever consider that.
I mean, that would require capitalism to not be capitalism.
Yeah. The thing that always blew my mind when I learned about this was like, what is the sole purpose of a corporation? Like what is the point of incorporating? Its sole purpose isn't to create a great product, isn't to provide a good service, isn't to like improve the general welfare of humanity, isn't to create a successful business. It's to simply increase the profits of its shareholders, right? That's the only purpose a corporation has, which to me, I was like, wow, how that the modus operandi?
Seems like that's now the modus operandi of Congress as well.
I mean, Bernie Sanders voted yes on the Endless Frontier Act.
What?
Which, as we've discussed before, is just provoking a Cold War with China and subsidizing corporations by handing off all of our R&D to corporations who aren't going to reinvest in the people. And he voted yes for the Endless Frontier Act with this amendment.
That's what I'm saying. Okay, so he did vote for that. Holy shit. After like chastising it publicly, he votes for it.
Well, my hope is since Bernie's in charge of the budget, I think he's going to try and remove it via the appropriations. I don't know if that'll actually happen, but I'm hoping that's the case.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out who do you put your hope and will behind.
Well, the people that have a proven track record of actually following through with that, like DeFazio.
It's also hard to do that because it's hard to trust isolated individuals when they're operating within a system that demands compliance.
For sure, right? And I feel like that's like the biggest part of the problem, right? Where it's like the way, quote unquote, to get things done in DC is to like rub shoulders with the right people and be like, hey, I'll do favors for you if you do favors for me. And then all of a sudden you're caught in the system.
Our political system runs on corruption. Lobbying is corrupt. The way that we have our campaign system set up with Citizens United, that's corrupt. It's all bribery. But we've just become okay with that because it's been dressed up in these fancy procedural terms that make it sound like something elevated, but it's not elevated, and we're no better than other countries. We're not immune to these problems. In fact, we've entrenched these problems deeply into our political system.
I mean, just look at the horse trading going on with this amendment. So I was looking at a little bit more. So the main reason that the Mississippi senator, cares so much about having these tests run in Mississippi is that that space center will not be fully engaged and the local contractors won't be employed unless NASA continues to run these tests in Mississippi, right? Apparently they were going to start moving testing to Florida. But now with this being passed, with that center being kept open and ready to conduct tests in perpetuity, they get to keep all of these Mississippi workers employed.
One thing I did want to add is that it's not just Blue Origin that's doing this. It's apparently a team with Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and Draper. So all of them are getting this money. They've conglomerated together. So they're essentially working together on their human landing system. They're ganging up against SpaceX. So it's basically SpaceX by themselves. And then all four of these people together for the second bid.
From the people who brought you bombings of Palestinian children.
With a cost of nearly double of what SpaceX had bid.
For no reason. Completely duplicative of the work SpaceX is already doing.
It's always interesting the dollar amount when it was initially proposed and the money that gets added later.
It's not going to cost $10 billion. It's going to be like $100 billion.
I'm seeing four of these people adhere. You think they're going to be satisfied with $10 billion? No, this is just a foot in the door.
So they can strip NASA's funding and put it in their own pockets.
Watch out for the House's response to this. We will keep you guys updated.
It's a rounding error in the military budget.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Left Field. If you're looking for more leftist takedowns of the current order or to find out what's left of America, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Send us any comments or suggestions to leftfieldpoliticspod@gmail.com and find us on Instagram at leftfieldpolitics. Until next time, Left Fielders.